have I personally contributed to the catastrophe of my life? And if so, how? Even if it's a very small way, owning up to that little bit, I think, is actually a step in the right direction. Hey guys, welcome back to my series on Jordan Peterson's book, 12 Rules for Life. Rule number 6. All right, so the rule goes, set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world. That is a very biblical principle. Jesus talks about how we should take the plank out of our own eye before we try to take the speck out of our neighbor's eye. I remember someone once told me, don't point your finger at other people because just realize there are 3 fingers at least pointing back at you. Right, if you see that. So yeah, Peterson says, set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world. And so he talks about how we have a choice when we experience tragedy or when we experience evil in our lives. There's vengeance, right? A lot of people will take it out on the world, the abuse that they've experienced, right? The abused often becomes the abuser in the future. We all know that. That's why therapy is so important, because hurt people hurt people. And so vengeance is one of the possibilities, right? When we experience tragedy like that. But the other option that we have is transformation. Peterson says this, people who experience evil may certainly desire to perpetuate it, to pay it forward, but it is also possible to learn good by experiencing evil. And that just reminds me of the story of Joseph, in the book of Exodus, how his brothers sold him into slavery, right? He was sold to Egypt. All of that led to eventually Joseph being put second in command in Egypt during one of the greatest famines of the time. And he ended up coming face to face with his brothers who went to Egypt for food. And Joseph could have at that time acted out with vengeance upon these brothers who sold him into slavery in the first place, but he didn't. And so Joseph himself tells his brother at the end of this story, he said, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." And so, yeah, that's something to think about. Instead of acting out with vengeance upon the circumstances of our lives and the unfairness and the tragedies that we face, there is a choice to respond differently, like Joseph did, and allowing these things actually to transform us for good. In T.S. Eliot's play, The Cocktail Party, one of the characters is speaking with her psychiatrist, and she actually tells her psychiatrist that she hopes that all of her suffering is her fault. And the psychiatrist is kind of shocked, like, why would you wish it were that way? And she says, because if it is my fault, then at least I might be able to do something about it. But if it is God's fault, if reality itself is flawed and hell-bent on ensuring my misery, then I am doomed, right? Because I cannot change the structure of reality itself, but maybe I can change my own life. So I think that is actually a very empowering way to think about it. I would rather take personal responsibility for the things, for the suffering that I'm experiencing than blaming it on reality. When bad things happen, asking those tough questions like, have I personally contributed to the catastrophe of my life? And if so, how? Even if it's a very small way, owning up to that little bit, I think, is actually a step in the right direction. For example, one of the topics that we've been talking about a lot in church recently is community and making friends. And it's very easy sometimes to blame the church or blame the community that we're in for being unfriendly. But it's important also to examine ourselves. What have we been doing to contribute to that sense of loneliness? The pastor was talking about how one of the people in the congregation was complaining to him about when he was moving, nobody was there to help him with moving. And he complained to the pastor, and the pastor said, well, that's an easy problem to solve. Just ask the people that you helped move before. And the man was like, oh, well, I haven't helped anyone move before. And so that's a very good reflective question is, are you helping other people, or are you just expecting to be helped? You know, it's sort of a give and take. You have to be able to give friendship and contribute to other people's lives if you want it in return, right? Given you shall receive. And so that's part of taking personal responsibility, you know, instead of just blaming the universe. So Peterson says, consider your circumstances. Have you taken full advantage of the opportunities afforded to you? Are there things that you could do, that you know you could do, that would make things around you better? Have you cleaned up your life? And he says if the answer is no, somewhere that we can start is to stop doing the things that we know we shouldn't do, what we know to be wrong. He says, don't waste time questioning how you know that what you're doing is wrong if you are certain that it is. I love the way that he phrased this. He says, inopportune questioning can confuse without enlightening, as well as deflecting you from action. You can know that something is wrong or right without knowing why, because humans, we are complex, and our reality is very complex for us to completely understand and comprehend. But if you know it to be wrong, he says, just stop doing it and start putting things in order. Do only those things that you could speak of with honor. And that's actually a pretty good litmus test, I think, you know, of what are the things that we should be doing. And he says, once we clean up our lives, we become stronger, we become less cluttered, and we're able to bear the remaining tragedies. He says, perhaps you will discover that your now less corrupted soul, much stronger than it might otherwise have been, is now able to bear those remaining necessary, minimal, inescapable tragedies. And I love this. He says, perhaps you will even learn to encounter them so that they stay tragic, merely tragic, instead of degenerating into outright hellishness. And so, yeah, tragedies do happen, and it's unfair and it's unfortunate. But he says that when we can experience tragedy as just that, just tragedy, he says that's actually a win, because the other option is that they degenerate into worse influences in our lives when they cause us to become vengeful or hateful, resentful or bitter. And I think that's an awesome way of looking at the things that we experience that are unfortunate. You know, embrace it. Experience it, feel the sadness, feel the hurt of it, feel the pain of it, but then move on, right? Move on from the tragedy instead of allowing that to degenerate and sort of rot in our souls. And so I'm just going to talk a little bit about what this chapter reminded me as I was reading it, my personal reflection. I grew up in the church. My parents are pastors, so that makes me a PK or a pastor's kid. And growing up as a pastor's kid, I definitely, had some negative impressions of the church. Off the bat, I just want to say that it wasn't the church's fault. I learned later on that, you know, I had to take responsibility for my own actions, and I had to ask myself that question, you know, how did I contribute to what I'm feeling right now, to this feeling of oppression or frustration? I remember specifically one time where I came out of a meeting with church leaders, and they were talking about their vision for expansion in a way. I think a lot of people in that room were probably quite excited about it, because it can be very exciting. But for me, as I was listening to it, honestly, I just felt this huge weight of oppression and frustration, and I started to feel like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna be so tired, you know. And I went to my car that evening and I just sat there at the steering wheel and started crying. I was like feeling so sorry for myself. And all of a sudden I just felt an impression, like a voice, and it just said, you know, Melody, why are you crying? Why are you crying? And I stopped crying for a second and thought about it, and I started saying, you know, because it's unfair, you know, because I'm being forced to do all of these things. But no one is forcing you. And I realized, like, you know, why am I complaining about all of these things? It's not like, you know, someone put a gun to my head and said I have to do all of these things. You know, at one point I did agree to do them. At one point I did say yes, and I let myself be put in this situation that I'm not happy about right now. And I just realized that I was feeling this huge pity party because of the accumulation of all the times I did not speak up for myself. It was an accumulation of all of my own decisions to avoid responsibility and blaming other people, blaming my church leaders, blaming the authority figures in my life. You know, it was an accumulation of all of that that led me to this point of feeling utterly oppressed, you know. And when I realized that, it was like all of a sudden a light bulb went on, and I was just, wow, I am actually responsible. I actually personally contributed to the situation I'm in now, so why am I complaining about it? And so then I realized at that point that I really had two options. One was I could continue to agree to what they wanted me to do. And if I were to agree, then I have to realize that I'm the one agreeing to it, and I should just do it gladly, right? I'm choosing this, so I should choose it happily. Or my other option would be to say no, you know, that I can actually say no. And I think that was when I learned that lesson finally. I didn't have to say yes to everything. When I said yes to everything, but I wasn't taking personal responsibility for that yes, then I was only harming myself and those around me because they knew that I was doing it grudgingly. And by saying no, I am doing a favor to myself and doing a favor to other people. And also I learned to trust myself more because I can trust myself to make decisions that are for my well-being, instead of just what other people want me to do. Because at the end of the day, you're stuck with you. All the other people that you're trying to please, not all of those people will stick it to the end, but you are stuck with you. And if you can be happy with yourself, if you can trust yourself, I think that's what really counts. And so just doing things that you won't resent later on in the future, standing up for yourself, speaking up for yourself, you know, I think those are all really important. So yeah, set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world. Hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for the next one. I'll see you. Bye.